Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for joining us on this Japan Up Close webinar session. Our topic is Japan-ASEAN cooperation as security partners. A very interesting, very timely topic, and we have two very distinguished guests here to talk about it. Kitti Prasirtsuk is a professor of international relations at the Faculty of Political Science at Thammasat University in Thailand. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. Hoang Thi Ha is a senior fellow at the Yusof Ishak Institute and co-coordinator of the Institute's Regional Strategic and Political Studies program. Welcome and thank you. This is, last year Japan and ASEAN celebrated 50 years of friendship and cooperation. And I think it's fair to say that for most of its history, that relationship has focused primarily on trade and economic development. And while those things are still core components, security is increasingly an important issue for Japan, for ASEAN member states, and it's a growing area for cooperation. ASEAN was founded, of course, during the Cold War. Its early relationship with Japan developed in that context. But now there's a new great power competition in town, and that is shaping geopolitics and security arrangements in the region. Everyone involved is responding. Japan is increasing its defense spending, acquiring new capabilities, and promoting new ideas like a free and open Indo-Pacific. ASEAN states, too, are finding their way in this new environment, sometimes together, sometimes on divergent paths. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing both our speakers address these issues and more over the next hour or so. The way it's going to work is I'm going to ask each of them to give an opening statement, some opening remarks addressing this topic. Then I'm going to ask some follow-up questions. And then I'm going to invite members of our audience to ask follow-up questions of their own. You can put those questions in the Q&A window, the function on the Zoom webinar. You can do that anytime between now and a couple minutes before we end. Don't leave it until the last second, otherwise I might have to shut you down. All right, so thanks very much. And Professor Kitti, let's start with you. Japan-ASEAN security cooperation. How do you see it, and where would you like to see it go?
Okay, thank you so much, Jonathan. Good afternoon, and konnichiwa, minasan. Thank very much for having me in this meaningful and timely seminar. Today, I would like to talk on three related accounts. First, I would like to check the status and trace back the evolution of Japan-ASEAN security cooperation in the past few decades. I usually will give my perspective to evaluate the cooperation so far. Second, I analyze the rationale and converging interests for both Japan and ASEAN, that both of them should pursue more security cooperation together. And third, I will suggest the way forward for our security cooperation, and probably we can call it partnership. And first, Japan-ASEAN cooperation in security has been interestingly increasing in the past decade, both on regional and bilateral basis. Example include cyber security capacity building. We do have Japan-ASEAN cyber security capacity buildings based in Bangkok. We have maritime cooperation on Coast Guard vessels and related training and exercises. Every year, Japan also takes part in Cobra Gold, the region's largest military exercise led by Thailand and the United States. It is happening now in Thailand. Japan tends to focus on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, HADR, which include the civilian evacuation. Japan also initiated the Official Security Assistance, or OSA, in addition to the well-known ODA, or Official Development Assistance. Japan also signed defense cooperation agreement with several individual ASEAN countries, including Thailand, of course, the Philippines, Malaysia. We can trace back Japan's role as a kind of security partner of ASEAN, I think since the 1980s, in fact. when Japan continually supported Thailand and ASEAN against Vietnam occupation of Cambodia during the decade. Japan kept the issue alive in G7 summit and other international fora to keep pressure on. Japan also gave a great amount of ODA to Thailand and ASEAN countries as a means for development. In other words, to increase economic security to attain prosperity and peace eventually. In the early 1990s, to address the uncertainty after the end of the Cold War, Japan was vocal in supporting ASEAN in establishing the ASEAN Regional Forum, or the ARF, the meeting among ASEAN foreign minister and the counterpart from dialogue partner country, including Japan, China, the US, Australia, India, and so on. That functioned as a venue to exchange security cooperation, to exchange viewpoint, strategic viewpoint with external major power. Japan also importantly dispatched its self-defense force for the first time overseas to participate in the peacekeeping operation of PKO in Cambodia in the early 1990s, which gained a lot of acceptance and considerable admiration from ASEAN and the international community. In 1998, Japan, under Prime Minister Obuchi, was instrumental in setting up the Human Security Fund in the United Nations. That means Japan has been very keen to contribute on human security and non-traditional security in ASEAN and anywhere in the world. In the early 2000s, amid the increasing incident of piracy and armed robbery against ships, Japan initiated the RECAP, or Regional Cooperation Agreement on Combating Piracy and Armed Robbery Against Ships in Asia, to facilitate information sharing to prevent and resolve if an accident happened. In 2010s, Japan came to supply Coast Guard vessel to the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia, as I mentioned a bit earlier. So overall, Japan has been working with ASEAN for a long period on non-traditional security, at least for 2 decades. So second, I think there are converging interests between Japan and ASEAN countries in terms of security. Caught between the US-China rivalry, ASEAN countries tend to avoid choosing sides. That it would be beneficial for ASEAN to work with a third pole country like Japan, the European Union, and India. Although Japan is very close to the US, but somehow Japan can play an independent role in ASEAN country in Southeast Asia. And meanwhile, Japan cannot move the country away from neighboring China that needs peaceful coexistence. Cooperating with ASEAN on security would make Japan look less attached to the US and can exercise an independent role in security realm. For instance, Japan plays a constructive role in cybersecurity with ASEAN through the ASEAN-Japan Cybersecurity Capacity Building Center, AJCCBC. This is hard to think that this kind of center will be possible with other great powers like the United States or China. This means that Japan has a high level of trust among ASEAN countries, and people tend to refer to this survey by Yusof Ishak Institute, where our colleague Hoang working there. Japan always score very high as a trusted major power, the highest, always more than 60% continually. Therefore, the potential area for cooperation, particularly in non-traditional security, HADR, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, climate change security, and environmental security, cyber security, maritime security. Japan maritime country, of course, it has a lot of expertise that can help ASEAN country, like in law enforcement, advanced surveillance technology, maritime domain awareness or MDA, AI-based security, even space operation. Countries like Indonesia and Thailand, they are very keen on developing aerospace industry as well. Thailand just launched our own satellite recently. Defense industry development and also health security. On traditional security, as security perspective and needs can be vary in ASEAN, they are not the same. Japan may develop some, I call spectrum or tailor-made approach in pursuing security cooperation with individual countries. Regional approach can be at some certain extent, but for traditional security, I think it's based on a bilateral basis, like a tailor-made approach. And for example, higher proportion of traditional security can be with countries like the Philippines, Vietnam. And last year, Prime Minister Kishida and President Marcos Jr. agreed to strengthen their defense cooperation, also with the United States, in the three-way ties collaborations. Overall, I think Japan can consider two approaches in security cooperation: more traditional security in Northeast Asia with US, with Korea, and more non-traditional security in Southeast Asia. Of course, some countries have more traditional element, but this can be termed, I would like to call it decoupling security. Different security approach in Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, though I understand that it wouldn't be easy. But anyhow, Japan can be a different major power. In fact, Japan has been so for the past few decades for ASEAN. And in addition, and importantly, the situation in Myanmar, I think, may eventually require Japan to exercise some role similar to what it did in Cambodia in the early 1990s when the time comes. I think Japan would be a very trusted partner for ASEAN and also for Myanmar, because Japan also has a special relation with Myanmar historically as well at the time of World War II, during that time as well. In conclusion, I think Japan, as the most trusted partner of ASEAN, Japan can have some independent role to play in the region, not that attached to the United States, and also beneficial for ASEAN countries, particularly in non-traditional security. And some tailor-made approach, of course, as I said, would be possible with some individual ASEAN countries. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. A wonderful overview. Thanks very much. Now let's turn to Ms. Hoang. What's your view of the situation, both past, present, future?
Thanks, Jonathan. And I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the organizer for having me here in this event to discuss a very important and interesting topic. I think this topic stands to gain more prominence in the coming time, given the geopolitics of today. Just now, Prof. Kitti has made a very comprehensive overview of Japan's security engagement with Southeast Asia, including a historical perspective. And I think a key takeaway from this historical overview is that Japan's significance to regional security in the past 5 decades actually transcends mere military consideration. Japan has been so crucial and consequential in shaping the regional order, at least since the late 1970s, based on the Fukuda Doctrine. And it has exercised its constructive role through its strong support for ASEAN multilateralism, the regional security architecture centered around ASEAN, the ASEAN Regional Forum, the ASEAN +3, the EAS, and after that, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Plus. And also, Japan has been very crucial and supportive in helping Southeast Asian countries address multiple non-traditional security needs, as Prof. Kitti has elaborated. From the more broader perspective of order building, I think Japan has consistently served as a stabilizing force for Asia. amid episodic periods of the US disengagement or neglect or distraction from the region. And I think this is a very prominent aspect of Japan's contribution to regional security and order. Most recently, for example, during the Trump administration, when the US withdrew from multilateralism and regional economic agreements, Japan did play a very pivotal role in keeping the US engaged in Asia through groundbreaking initiatives such as the Quad and the Free and Open Indo-Pacific strategy, as well as in shaping the regional economic order by pushing through the CPTPP and also by taking part in the RCEP. And as Prof. Kitti has mentioned, Southeast Asian countries adopt the principle of comprehensive security, which of course encompasses non-traditional security concerns, where Japan has played a very constructive role through both ASEAN frameworks and bilateral cooperation, and it covers many areas. For example, I come from Vietnam, and in mainland Southeast Asia, addressing the legacies of the war is a very important aspect of security domain, and Japan has played a very important role in helping Southeast Asian mainland countries to clear the bomb and mine, but also, as Prof. Kitti mentioned, in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, counter piracy, and in health security as well. Another important aspect of Japan's contribution to regional security is Japan's long-standing contributions to peacekeeping and peace-building endeavors in different parts of this region. And I think Japan really outpaces all other major powers in this respect, where it has played a role in like peacekeeping and peace building in Cambodia, in East Timor, Aceh, Muslim Mindanao, and also in Myanmar. And Japan's defense relations with Southeast Asian countries have been on an upward trajectory since the 1990s. According to Japanese scholar Ken Jimbo, and this is also the perspective adopted by the Japanese government themselves. Japan's defense relations with Southeast Asia have gone through the 3 stages. Starting stage in the 1990s, developing in the 2000s, and now deepening starting from mid-2010s. And we can see that with higher frequency of high-level exchanges, working level exchanges, capacity building cooperation, the number of port calls by the Japan self-defense forces, and participation in multiple bilateral and multilateral military exercises, as well as the establishment of various foreign defense and strategic dialogues with key Southeast Asian countries, and a series of defense agreements with these countries as well. I will spare the details because Prof. Kitti has elaborated on them in his previous remark, but I would like to highlight the point that the increasing intensity of Japan's security engagements with the region has coincided with the shifting power dynamics in Asia, with the resurgence of China and Chinese attempts to assert its claims and control in regional waters, both in the East China Sea and South China Sea, as well as the escalating strategic rivalry between the US and China. And as the regional security environment has become much more volatile and dangerous, and Japan itself recognizes it as the most dangerous and complex stage since the end of the World War II, then Japan's strategic outlook has been undergoing a very important transformation, as evident in the release of its new strategic documents in late 2022, the National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, and the Defense Build-Up Program, with the commitments to acquire counter-strike capabilities and increase its budget defense budget to 2% of the GDP, which is a very, very significant and dramatic development. And this strategic shift is driven by Japan's imperative to acquire deterrence and denial capabilities to prevent opponents from unilateral changes to the status quo by force. And as Japan positions itself as a more substantial security actor, I think it could inject, and it has injected new momentum and strategic depth to the security partnerships with Southeast Asian counterparts. And I just read the specific action lines in Japan's new plan for a free and open Indo-Pacific, which was released in May last year, especially the fourth pillar on security and safe use of the air and sea. And it is very specific, very detailed, and very strategic indeed. The most important development, of course, lately is the launch of the official security assistance, as Prof. Kitti has mentioned. The Philippines is the first beneficiary, the armed forces of the Philippines, and Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam are coming next. And I noticed that there are three key characteristics of Japan's security approach to not only Southeast Asia, but broader in the Asia, in the Indo-Pacific. The first point, the first characteristic is rules-based. I think Japan's approach to security cooperation with Southeast Asia very much underscores the normative aspect, as it highlights the consistently highlights the principles of the rule of law and the rules-based maritime order, which is anchored in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, as well as the UN Charter. And Japan has very much promoted the normative synergy between the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific and its own free and open Indo-Pacific, because it emphasizes core principles such as freedom from coercion or openness and commitment to a rules-based framework. The second aspect, I think, is needs-based. As Prof. Kitti mentioned, tailor-made, right? Japan's heightened efforts in defense equipment transfer and capacity building for Southeast Asia, both in hardware and software, have predominantly focused on maritime security capacity building for Southeast Asian littoral states. And this has involved supporting their maritime law enforcement capabilities and enhancing their maritime and air domain awareness. I think Japan is a very rare, is quite unique in the region, among the Quad countries, in the fact that it really emphasizes the air component in the maritime domain awareness and not only the maritime. The third aspect, which is very important, I think, is the multi-pronged approach. Prof. Kitti mentioned the bilateral and the ASEAN frameworks, but I think Japan is increasingly expanding its engagement beyond these existing frameworks. And it is actively participating in more flexible minilateral or plurilateral arrangements, such as with the Quad members and other European powers, and also, as we have noticed since the past year, the emerging US-Japan Philippines triad. For the second part of my presentation, I will focus on how Japan has been received or perceived as a security partner in Southeast Asia. There is no comprehensive public survey, but I can gather from a few surveys, both elite and public surveys, as well as from the media discourse in the region. And I think I can safely assume that Japan is generally welcomed as a security partner of the region, although this sentiment may not be evenly shared across all Southeast Asian states, and it is very much contingent upon the specific area of security cooperation. I think maritime Southeast Asian states, and that includes Vietnam, they seem to be more welcoming and more actively engaging with Japan in defense security terms, especially especially in the maritime security, as evident in various defense agreements and various capacity building activities or port calls or military exercises that they have undertaken with Japan during recent years. And overall, across the region, there is a lot of strategic trust in Japan and a positive reception of Japan's role in contributing to the regional rules-based order. We can see that from the findings of the surveys conducted by our own institute, the State of Southeast Asia survey by ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute, and also the public survey by Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2019, and the Pew Research survey before that as well. I think, unlike in Southeast Asia, where Japan's militant past is heavily politicized and scrutinized, Southeast Asia generally does not mirror such concerns. And the prospect of Japan's militant resurgence is rarely portrayed as a worry in the region, at least based on media discourse or discussions with Southeast Asian security experts. For example, according to our State of Southeast Asia survey, Japan is consistently ranked as the most trusted power in the region. Since the survey first edition in 2019. And interestingly, among the factors that contribute to the trust in Japan, its military strength ranks the lowest. And the primary reasons for our trust in Japan are Japan's reputation as a responsible stakeholder that upholds international law, as well as Japan's economic resources and political will for global leadership. And of note, the primary reason for some Southeast Asian lack of trust in Japan stems from the perception that Japan does not or may not have the capacity or the political will for global leadership. And that distrust is not really about the concerns over Japan's military power. And of course, this is a perception among some Southeast Asians, according to our survey, but it is, I think it could probably reflect the ongoing introspection or soul searching within Japan regarding its future trajectory as a security player. Japan over the past decade has taken really serious steps to bolster its defense capabilities, which has been widely supported by the Japanese public. But I think this introspection and soul searching is still far from concluded. And the constraints of Japan's pacifist constitution and the commitment to pacifism remains very much deeply entrenched in the Japanese society. I think this still presents an ideological and political barrier to Japan's aspirations to become a more robust security actor. And one last note, perceptions of Japan's role as a securities actor in this region can easily swing to extremes. On the one hand, there may be exaggerated fears regarding the resurgence or the past or the memory of the past militaristic Japan. And this could be fueled or driven by propaganda from Japan's adversaries like China, but not only China, but Russia as well. On the other hand, there are concerns about Japan's willingness and capability, given, as I mentioned, its ongoing internal debate, and also the uncertainty surrounding its economy, which may not be able to sustain substantial multi-year investments in Japan's capabilities, defense capabilities, and in helping other regional countries. So on last point, it is therefore very important for Japan, I think, to continue to enhance its outreach efforts and to articulate its strategic intent clearly and consistently so as to promote understanding of Japan's defense and security policy in the new strategic environment. I think more exchanges, more dialogues, and more joint activities would be helpful. And even as Japan is pursuing a multi-pronged approach in its security engagements with different sets of players, and even as it is becoming more realist and is gravitating towards the balance of power, I think it's still important for Japan to continue to actively engage and participate in ASEAN security architecture, especially the ADM Plus and the ADM Plus One with Japan. And on that note, that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thorough enough that I'm wondering if I have any questions, because you've covered everything. I would like to delve a little bit more into this idea of kind of balance of power and kind of shifting networks of relationships. To what degree do both of you see this growing security relationship between Japan and ASEAN as a straightforward hedge against American disengagement? So we have, U.S.-China great power rivalry in the region. There are questions about U.S. will and capacity to remain fully engaged. So, do Japan and ASEAN simply need to partner up to add more weight to the scale? Or is there the potential or the desire to create a kind of make this relationship the basis of a new kind of way of ensuring security in the region in the region? It's kind of maybe more of a supplement or an alternative to this sort of traditional balance of power that we're seeing between the U.S. and China. I'll start with Professor Kitti.
Okay, thanks for your question and the interesting statement from colleague Ms. Huang. In my view, I think Japan can be a different kind of balancer, not in the form of traditional balance of power that if the US somehow disengage, if Trump come back again and Japan will replace the US. I don't see much on that. I think Japan can be a different kind of great power that can work with ASEAN and also can still work with China as well, because we do have ASEAN +3, we do have East Asia Summit, we have mechanism that Japan and China and ASEAN, Korea can work together. In my view, I do not expect Japan would be the replacement for the US in the traditional sense, in the balance of power. Of course, the picture is more complex because on the one hand, Japan would function like that as well. For example, with the Philippines, with Vietnam, with Malaysia. But overall, ASEAN maybe not quite. For Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, probably Singapore, even a bit Indonesia. So I would like to see a different kind of role that Japan can play. And I think Japan has played that kind of role as well. During 1980, when the US withdrew from the region since the end of the Vietnam War, I think Japan functioned differently. Japan did not supply security assistance to ASEAN countries, but more in economics. But now, why not increasing security cooperation, but more in non-traditional security, which is beneficial for all and non-controversial for all the countries. And China probably cannot complain much on that as well. Overall, I think we need to keep good relation among our in the regions with China as well, I think.
Thank you. Ms. Huang, what do you think?
I would like to add that Southeast Asian countries historically had a poor record of alliance building, and they hold ambivalent and contradictory views regarding the desirability and the utility of balanced power as a pathway to manage the regional order. However, if the objective of balance of power is to deny the emergence of a hegemonial country to dictate the terms of regional order, then I think it has been the strategic goal of most, if not all, Southeast Asian countries since the end of the Cold War. But their instruments and their approaches to achieve balance of power do not follow the classical pattern of forming military alliances, and instead, the alignments and the coalitions in Southeast Asia are very much diffuse, very ad hoc, and non-military centric, and inclusive rather than exclusive. And they embrace comprehensive security rather than collective security. So this is where I think Japan, as an ally of the US, but also as a friend of Southeast Asia, a crucial economic player in the region, would add great value. According to our State of Southeast Asia survey, Japan is consistently among the top choices as a third party for Southeast Asian countries to hedge against the US-China strategic rivalry. But that hedging comes from a very broad understanding of engagement and security, not purely in material balance of power, because I think Japan is definitely not a replacement of the US. And of course, is not seeking to be a replacement or even an alternative, because the Japan today puts its alliance with the US as the core of its security policy. And also, even if defense relations between Japan and Southeast Asian countries are moving upward, I don't think it could reach the depth and the scope and the magnitude that could change the balance of power. So by Japan alone. So as I said, Japan can add value in the broader sense of regional building, about economic security, about the alternative as a security, as an economic partner. I think the EU is a very good word about Japan's role as a multiplying force, right? As we can see in the trilateral security arrangement with the US and the Philippines, there are areas where Japan can add value, especially in terms of helping the Philippines improve its defense infrastructure, for example. So that is where Japan can be as both a bridge between the US and the region, and also as a force multiplier.
Thank you. When it comes to more specific on-the-ground commitments from Japan, things that might go beyond capacity building, like OSA, training exercises, the building of the defense infrastructure that you just mentioned, Ms. Hoang. You're looking forward. I mean, what if you're thinking about things like joining patrols in the South China Sea? What do Southeast Asian countries expect from Japan, and what would you like to see Japan do? Maybe looking into a kind of middle to long term horizon. Professor Kitti, do you want to start?
I think on joint patrol, I am a bit reluctant at this point. If it does happen, it should be more a multilateral effort rather than the effort between Japan and some particular country that not send a positive signal to China, and that may increase the tensions. So I think that should be done in a subtle way. But I think my perspective may be different. The country that very much in need for security requirement, like the Philippines, Vietnam, or Malaysia. But I think ASEAN in general, we have the hedging strategy. We do not want to getting too close to any particular power. We would like to maintain good relationship with all the major powers involved in our region. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hoang?
There is no Southeast Asian consensus on this question, of course, and Prof. Kitti just offer a Southeast Asian perspective, quite typical from a mainland Southeast Asian country, right? Thailand, but also Cambodia and Laos, I think, but Vietnam may be different. So among Southeast Asian countries now, I think the Philippines is the most forward-leaning in engaging with Japan, but not only Japan, but the US and other US allies in in sending a clear message to China about deterrence, and through joint patrols, through military exercises. In this sense, I think the Philippines is very much an outlier. And other maritime Southeast Asian countries, I think they are somewhere in between. They would welcome the presence and the engagement of the US and also other allies and partners in the regional waters, credible enough to send a message and to be of deterrence effect to China, if possible, hopefully, but not to the extent of provoking China or raising the tensions in the region, because then they will be caught in making choices. So this formula of being not too hot, not too cold, which is very difficult to reach in this environment today. So it is very difficult now to talk about a Southeast Asian perspective on this topic, because we are clearly different and divided on this topic.
That is absolutely true. I wonder also if you're talking about, of course, networks of relationships that we're seeing emerge in the region, and Japan as a bridge maybe from Southeast Asia to the US. We're connected to the US, but not 100% part of it. What about other players with interests in the region? I'm thinking India or even Europe. Can the Japan-ASEAN relationship, be it collective or bilateral relationships, be a kind of platform to bring other, potentially interested parties into this growing kind of network of lattice work of security, architecture in the region? Let's go the opposite direction this time, just for a change. Ms. Hoang, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't have any specific examples at the moment, but I think this is the trend going forward. And the role of Japan as part of the network, or to network other like-minded partners, is very much prescribed in the free and Indo-Pacific strategy, free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. And but I think it's very difficult to do it through the ASEAN framework, because the ASEAN framework is very much fixed and rigid, right? ASEAN and the ASEAN plus, the ADMM plus, for example, ASEAN plus 8 countries, or ASEAN Japan. But this can be done through very ad hoc, very flexible arrangements. And most likely it can be like approach going through the one Southeast Asian country like the Philippines or Vietnam, in terms of defense industry cooperation or defense equipment. There could be a coordination and synergy of efforts by, for example, Japan and India in providing these, in enabling these capabilities to some Southeast Asian maritime littoral states.
So if you're thinking about new arrangements like the Quad, you would envision something more like, the Quad cooperating on a bilateral or on a direct basis with individual ASEAN member states, rather than a kind of ASEAN Quad kind.
Not even through the Quad, because the Quad has a stigma that can make Southeast Asian countries be quite cautious and sensitive. But Quad members individually, through very flexible arrangements, can approach Southeast Asian countries, the relevant countries, through very how to say it? It doesn't have to go through institutionalized or formal frameworks, but more like, as I said, tailor-made, needs-based approach.
Right, thank you. Professor Kitti, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think Australia is interesting in this regard. Actually, I have just returned from the Australia-ASEAN Summit last week in Melbourne. We were also discussing about multilateralism in the new Quad arrangement, new Quad, consisting of the US, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines. Maybe that discussed informally, but we see something like that seem to be happening. We have seen the increasing cooperation in defense between Australia and the Philippines in the past year. They conducted military exercise, and also the US traditionally has Balikatan and other visiting force agreement with the Philippines. Japan also, as I said, Prime Minister Kishida also, met with Marcos Jr. They discussed about defense cooperation, issue like base access. Here, I think the issue in Southeast Asia, we cannot see it as Southeast Asia or South China Sea alone. It pretty much connected to the Taiwan Strait. Increasingly, if you recall recently that China, rather than 9 dash line, now they have 10 dash line go to the northern tip of Taiwan Island. So in my view, I think nowadays more and more South China Sea issue is not quite South China Sea issues, but very much related to the East China Sea, to Taiwan. And interestingly, if you think about Xi Jinping visited to Vietnam in December, in my view, I think it's quite significant. I think China would like to demarcate the South China Sea conflicts to limit the conflict, not much with Vietnam now. So probably focus with the Philippines and try to convince Vietnam for economic cooperations, investment, trade, export through northern Vietnam to China, to Europe, and so on. So I would like to hear the view from our Vietnamese colleague as well. So I think that is a strategy that
All right, what's your view? Do you see that strategy happening, and is it going to work?
Well, I think the Philippines has been on the receiving end mainly from the Chinese coercion recently or since last year, but it doesn't mean that Vietnam has been spared at all. So I don't think that if China does have that kind of strategy, it has done it badly, because it continues to make Vietnam very nervous and very anxious and very concerned about its activities and encroachments in Vietnam's EEZs. And recently, not only in the South China Sea surrounding the Spratleys Islands, but also the Gulf of Tonkin, where the two countries already signed a demarcation agreement, and China really just announced its baseline in that Gulf of Tonkin, and that baseline is very expensive, and it may not. It depends. It has not announced its territorial waters coming from that baseline, and if it overlaps with the Vietnamese waters as demarcated, then what would happen, right? So we cannot say that China has violated the agreement, but the expensive baseline could be a cause of concern, because it can affect the freedom of navigation, not only of Vietnam, but also other user states as well. So I don't think China has been very successful and effective in assuring Vietnam that, the South China Sea is not a big concern. It is a very, very big concern for Vietnam.
Thank you. We're approaching the last sort of 10, 12 minutes. So now I'd invite anyone in the audience with a question to start posting in the Q&A. In the meantime, I'll lob one more. Ms. Hoang, you mentioned the Quad and the stigma that is attached to it, in Southeast Asia. Another newish concept related to that I think carried some stigma, or at least was greeted skeptically early on, was the idea of an Indo-Pacific and a free and open Indo-Pacific in particular. I think there was a sense initially that maybe this was just another disguised way of talking about China containment. There was some hesitancy among ASEAN member states to endorse it and sign on to it. I see that changing more recently, and I'm wondering if you could both address the idea, the question of how ASEAN and ASEAN member states are responding to or endorsing or not the kind of Japanese initiated idea of the free and open Indo-Pacific.
Okay, I will start first. Of course, there is one term called Indo-Pacific, but there are many articulations of what it means. And the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific is the ASEAN articulation of what it thinks about the Indo-Pacific. And it doesn't define Indo-Pacific as a region, but more like as a construct, actually. And in that document, ASEAN has two components. One is the principles, the other is practical cooperation. So the principles, there is a lot of commonality with the articulation of the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy by Japan, especially the principles of rules-based order or freedom. We don't use, I think we also use the word freedom, but maybe in Japan's articulation, it also covers freedom in the domestic scene, right? Democracies, for example, but in Southeast Asian interpretation, freedom means sovereignty, independence, freedom from coercion, and that also is aligned with the free and open Indo-Pacific concept by Japan and also by the US. The rule of law is very important. Inclusiveness can be quite different. For Southeast Asia, for ASEAN, inclusiveness means all of you, all of the powers being together, being engaged and present in this region, and that includes China. Inclusiveness from the point of view of Japan, or especially from the US and other European powers, maybe that inclusiveness means that they have a stake in this region, and it's not only Southeast Asia and China alone together. So it is quite different in that sense. In terms of the practical cooperation, the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific identifies, I think, 4 areas: maritime cooperation, connectivity, sustainability, and economic integration. And on all those 4 areas, ASEAN and Southeast Asia are open to engagement and cooperation with all dialogue partners and powers. So ASEAN has made a lot of progress, actually, in terms of getting these dialogue partners to sign on to the AOIP. They signed a lot of joint statements in recent years about synergizing between their Indo-Pacific strategies and ASEAN where possible, especially in practical cooperation. To some extent, I think there are still there are, of course, differences in terms of the conceptualization and the and the strategic intent, but there are a lot of areas where ASEAN can work with relevant dialogue partners or major powers to advance their interests, their common interests.
Thank you. That's great. Professor Kitti, FOIP and Southeast
I
Asia.
think for the AOIP, from the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, I think ASEAN made it clear that it prioritizes economic connectivity, sustainability, and also maritime cooperation. I think Japan can work along that line. So you can see that overall, ASEAN is not keen on security, traditional security. Of course, some countries are more keener than other countries, but common denominator would be economic connectivity, sustainability, and I think Japan has a lot to contribute to this. And the IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Frameworks, I think it's still not that clear. We ASEAN and Japan can work on that. And actually, AOIP, I think it has been released how many years ago? Quite 5 years, almost 5 years. we should have a new versions. AOIP 2.0, probably we can work with Japan to make it more concrete. I think that's how ASEAN would like to have.
And it is a very
environment security, that would be important to us. Yes.
Yeah, well, I was just about to say that it is a very, especially from the ASEAN side, a very kind of holistic view of relationships and about what security means with an economic component, even with a climate component potentially. To what this may be our final question as we head into the last 5 minutes, but I mean, to what degree does there need to be increased engagement on, let's say, energy transition, or even more traditional trade and economics? IPEF is important, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of American, especially, will for more market access and other important issues in economics that are important to Southeast Asia. Japan is trying to fill that gap to some extent. Is that enough? To what degree does the kind of economic and other even non-security components of the relationship need to be beefed up in order to create this kind of more holistic security and get more buy-in for the security side of the relationship? Maybe Professor Kitti, if you want to start.
I think it's gonna be a complex pictures, amalgam of economics, non-traditional security, and also traditional securities. And in this year, next year, if American administration change, let's say if Republican come back, so it seems that Japan will have more role to play in the regions. And in fact, if you recall the origin of the Indo-Pacific concept, I think it started with the first Abe administration in 2006, 2007, when he first made a speech to the Indian Parliament, the confluence of the two oceans, India Ocean and Pacific Ocean. I think Japan has been instrumental in the Indo-Pacific concept, and probably next year Japan would have more role to propel the concept. But that is more complex. It's not traditional security based. It would be non-traditional security, economic connectivity, environment, climate change. That would be the role that ASEAN would expect from Japan, I think.
Thank you. Ms. Hoang, is there an economic hole in this puzzle that Japan can fill, or Japan needs to possibly bring the U.S. back to the table? I'm not sure. Tell me your views on the kind of economic component of this broader, holistic, comprehensive security picture.
I'm not sure whether I can answer this question because I'm not an economist, but I think the picture is getting very complex and complicated because Japan, on the one hand, is very much embedded and integrated with the East Asian economies, ASEAN, China, Japan, South Korea, in what we call as East Asian global supply chains. And a very big example of it is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP. And since its entry into force, I think a few years ago, Japan's trade and Japan's exports to China, especially because it doesn't have a bilateral trade agreement with China, has really increased and benefited Japanese exporters. And of course, with the RCEP and all of these simplified rules of origins of doing trade among the group members, that means that economic integration among these countries, East Asian nations, will increase. But at the same time, Japan is in another component led by the US, actually, in terms of economic security, resilience of supply chain. And this is where Japan has been really actively participating or collaborating with the Quad countries to to improve the security of the supply chain by diversifying away from China, especially in manufacturing and increasingly in high-tech, in high-end technologies. So the dynamics are still evolving. It's very difficult for us, for me at this moment, to think like how to reconcile all of this different directions and even conflicting dynamics. But for sure, Japanese companies are still very much present in the region, and they actually are pioneering in terms of implementing the China +1 strategy in Southeast Asia, but also in India. And Southeast Asian countries, especially Vietnam, is consistently ranked as a favorite choice for diversification, although it still very much remains in the planning rather than in the actual moving of the supply chains. So I think this is the dilemma facing Japan now. And this has created opportunities for Southeast Asia, but also the risks as well. We tend to benefit a lot from the diversification, but at the same time, I think the compliance cost in the trading with the US or the opportunity cost in losing trade with China can be also very damaging.
All right. Thank you so much. We are hitting the hour exactly. It's as if we rehearsed it. I promise we didn't, but it was great talking with both of you. I think we covered a pretty broad swath of what is a very important and very fast evolving relationship. And I want to thank you both for your time, and thank you also to our audience for joining us. I think we could follow up on this with 2 or 3 more sessions, and I hope that one day you will join us so we can do that. So thanks very much.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye, Prof. Kitti. Goodbye, Jonathan.
Bye.